Hey, no more sunsets. This is going to be a response to your video entitled Anarcho-Capitalism Will Not Work. Okay, so first, I want to preface this by saying that I do not identify as an anarcho-capitalist, but I do share many similar beliefs with it. Okay, so your first point is that businesses will establish a new state because they want the state to give them privileges and the like. I agree that it is in the business's self-interest to establish a state, at least big business, but this assumes that they are likely to be able to do so on a free market. The whole point of market anarchy and anti-statism, however, is to have competition in governance. This means that any business that wants to merge with other businesses in order to form a government, or in some other way try to form a government, must first beat out all of their competition. This is not an easy thing to do, and as many anti-statists have pointed out before, one of the reasons that war has been so prevalent in statist society is that states can simply shift the cost of war to their subjects. Private defense agencies would not have this advantage, and if they tried, competition would stifle them out, and social ostracization would also be a factor in preventing them from doing so. The only way that private defense agencies would be able to stifle out their competition completely is likely through war, and that is an extremely costly endeavor on the free market. Okay, you then bring up that it would be akin to a monarchy, but monarchies, like all states, don't have to compete in a free market, and the private defense agencies acquire their property either through homesteading or through purchase on the open market. The people who own large plots of land, therefore, do have to compete in the free market in order to preserve them. One thing about the whole thing that you mentioned about propaganda and ideology, you are completely correct. If people can be convinced en masse that forming a new state is a good idea, then they probably will. And all I have to say to that is, so what? Of course there's a chance that a new state will emerge in a free market, but for the reasons I mentioned before, among others, it is a somewhat unlikely situation once anti-statist institutions are in place. One other thing I want to point out is that worker co-ops and more socialist type societies will be likely to exist to some higher degree in a stateless society because many of the barriers to creating these institutions would not be in place as they are today. If you want to check out more info on this, I'd recommend you view Laughing Man OX's recent video on wage slavery being a symptom of unfree markets. Another thing is you completely strawman the Mises Institute by claiming that they somehow believe that all businesses love the free market. You do know that Rothbard was one of the biggest critics of big business, right? The Austrians are keenly aware of the connection between big business and big government, which is why many of them have gone to anarcho-capitalism in the first place. Look, big businesses want a relatively free market, but they also want the government to bail them out and grant them special favors. This is no secret. It's, big businesses especially, as opposed to small businesses, want more regulation because it creates barriers to entry for smaller businesses, which means that the bigger businesses don't have to face competition, and hence they grow even bigger, and you get into this corporate state that we now have. The whole thing on Somalia, Somalia is in the middle of statist turmoil. It's only in a quasi-state of anarchy right now because it collapsed due to statist wars. It is constantly being pressured to form a new government, so is it really a surprise that the people being petitioned to form this government are the top business leaders? Come on, I thought you were well aware of the connection between government and business. It's not really that much of a surprise to me. Not at all. Statelessness and the free market are great for the people, the consumers, the proletariat, if you will. It is a well-acknowledged fact among ANCAPs and anti-statists that large businesses prefer regulated and state-controlled markets, as I mentioned before. So please don't act like you've discovered the holy grail of anti-anarcho-capitalism when they have been completely upfront about everything you're mentioning here. Okay, about the whole Iceland thing. Iceland survived for 3 centuries. 3 centuries. That's much longer than most states in history. Not only that, but the people were not ideologically anti-statist at all, so it stands to reason that they would give in easily to government. What you don't mention about Iceland is the Catholic Church's involvement in the collapse of the Icelandic system. The Church had been sending Christian militants who were state-funded for years in order to threaten the people of Iceland to convert to Christianity. In short, Iceland's collapse was largely due to a lack of anarchistic or anti-statist sentiment among the people and not enough resistance to religion. Furthermore, I know of no anarcho-capitalist who says that Iceland was a pure example of anarcho-capitalism in practice. It wasn't. Okay, so yes, there are many. It has many features of an anarcho-capitalist institution, but it was not completely anarcho-capitalist. Although I'm not using that as an excuse to say that only the bad parts of it were wrong. Anyways, and for the record, I don't support capitalism or anarcho-capitalism, or at least not anarcho-capitalism in its pure form. So I am not, unlike anarcho-capitalists, presupposing a fiat land claim. In other words, I'm fine with non-capitalist institutions arising in the absence of a state. Anarcho-capitalists are merely more tolerable of different systems than anarcho-syndicalists or anarcho-communists who want to propose their own fiat land claim and abolish all forms of wage labor and most private property, as opposed to anarcho-capitalists who, for the most part, seem to be fine with things like voluntary socialism and worker co-ops so long as they are indeed voluntary. To your last point, yes, states arise out of conquest, but the first states largely arose out of mysticism and religion, and nowadays are simply presupposed as being correct and inevitable. The cost of conquest, however, on a free market is extremely high, and therefore makes the reemergence of a state somewhat unlikely, although certainly not an impossibility. So thanks for your video. I appreciate it. And that's it. Okay, there's one more thing I wanted to mention on the issue of property and the monarchy thing that you mentioned. I said before that they either acquire their property through homesteading principles or through purchase on the open market. I have to clarify that a little. We're talking about an anarcho-capitalist society right now, so we're talking about one who supposedly respects private property rights, or what is commonly thought of as private property rights. However, it must be pointed out that private property, like all forms of property and really all laws, is based on an intersubjective consensus. I'm sure you've heard this before from fringe elements. Property is respected, and to the point that the majority of people living within that society agree that it should be, to some degree. Force is always used in, at the margins. But, yeah, so I just thought I'd mention that.